Freedom of expression often comes under attack on college campuses. We have discussed this problem in several previous interviews, for instance with Zach Greenberg, Helen Pluckrose and Norbert Francis. My guest for this episode, Luana Maroja, is an associate professor of biology. She tells me about events on her campus at Williams College, featuring vocal minorities of students and faculty trying to curb free speech. So, hi everyone, I'm thrilled to be here with Professor Luana Maroja. This is the correct way of pronouncing, I hope, more or less. Yes. So welcome to the podcast, Luana.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you. So you are now Associate Professor of Biology at Williams College, and you hold the chair of, it's called the chair of the biochemistry program in that college. You received your PhD in 2008 from Cornell University, and the title of your thesis was Barriers to Gene Exchange in a Field Cricket Hybrid Zone. And as indicated by this title, your research has covered topics such as evolutionary genetics, landscape genetics, and speciation. And a few months ago, you wrote about the dire perspectives for free expression, at Williams College. So it's something very different from biology, at least at first sight. And so you wrote this text, which was shared by the famous biologist Jerry Coyne on his blog, Why Evolution is True. And also a few weeks ago, you wrote in The Atlantic an article about students who refuse to hear about genetic heritability. So we can start by talking about the issue of free speech on campus, specifically at Williams, right? And then we will move to ideological opposition to biology, or some aspects of biology. So concerning the evolution of the state of speech on campus, you trace what you see as a crisis for free speech at Williams to a panel discussion that took place in September of last year, in 2018, involving, among others, Reza Aslan. So I will just briefly introduce him to the audience because not everyone knows him. So he's a religious scholar at UC Riverside, and he's very media savvy, I think one can say. And he's known, among others, at least to me, for opposing the so-called new atheist authors. So, for instance, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. And he has been known to be very aggressive and even slanderous, I would say, towards them, calling Sam Harris, a racist several times, etc. And so yeah, I want to ask you why you consider his intervention on this panel discussion as especially significant and sort of a turning point for the state of free expression at Williams.
So for me, that talk was entitled "The Future of Free Speech," and in that talk, Reza Aslan, he wasn't the only person in the panel. Others, but he dominated the panel. He spoke almost the whole time. He said that it was very amusing. So he starts by bragging that he had once been disinvited from another venue. Then he proceeds on to saying that anything that offends him, any talk that offends him, should not take place in campus. That campuses should set rules on stone. He actually used that expression, rules on stone, and decide who can and who cannot give talks on campus, or what talks are allowed and what talks are not allowed. Then he went on, and for me that was the most shocking, went on to say that any talk that is not factual cannot take place in campuses. So only factual talks should be allowed in campuses. And to my surprise, the students were clapping throughout. He got standing ovation. So like a lot of people really like that idea of only factual talks taking place in campuses. In the questions, and unfortunately he did not pick me for a question. There were a lot of questions. In the questions, a few students asked like who is to decide who can and cannot give talk, and he said that the university needs to decide as a group, and then rules should set on stone. And I walked out of that pretty horrified, and I thought that perhaps this is something we should be looking into, is to adopt principles of free speech like the Chicago Statement or something like that. The history of Williams is that we had one disinvited speaker from the previous president, disinvited him, and that only gave more prestige and more propaganda, right, to the who was disinvited. Derbyshire was his name. And I don't see how disinviting anyone could be a good thing, and how prohibiting debate and open discussion at a university, that cannot be a good thing. So we got together with a few other colleagues with similar views. We sent a petition to campus. Within 3 days, we got almost half of the professors signing onto this petition, which was really impressive and way beyond our expectations. So things were looking really good. We had scheduled 2 days for discussion, and unfortunately, the students got notified of those dates, and they broke into our first discussion holding posters saying free speech harms. And there were students that were literally almost in tears during that, saying that we were trying to pass something without their approval, and we weren't. We were just discussing. There would be no votes. We wouldn't have that power. I mean, that has to be done at an official faculty meeting, not an unofficial meeting.
Right.
And that was pretty disturbing. And after that, we had the second meeting that went well. And then basically the administration has taken over the discussion and created a group to discuss what's going to be the policy of, they call it inclusion in campus and freedom of expression. So we're waiting for them to report, which should be sometime this month.
Okay. So the ball is in the court of the administration. So you write at some point in this text that, and here I will quote you. So, faculty sharing your concerns about the increasing censorship on campus felt afraid of speaking up, always assuming that they were an insignificant minority.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there were a few emails that went to the whole group of faculty. Almost all of those were opposed to free speech. The people that were in favor of that would not write to the whole group. They would come and talk to me personally. So we have seen a lot of that sometimes in, so a lot of people fear that if they say they are in favor of free speech, it means that, and that's what the students were accusing us during the meeting that they broke into, the students are going to say that they are racist and they just want to call white supremacists to campus, and that's why they want the right of free speech, so that the white supremacists do not get disinvited. So Derbyshire, the person that got disinvited here, was against immigration. I think it's his biggest platform. I don't know much about him, but he's considered a white supremacist against immigration and so on. Entirely made of students in campus, called them comfortable learning, that was bringing those speakers. Those speakers were not invited by faculty. So the accusation is clearly not true. I mean, none of the professors wanted free speech to be able to invite Derbyshire back, but instead we don't want to stifle debate. I mean, having censorship is a slippery slope. I was born during dictature in Brazil, and this is not a place where we want to be.
Yes, especially not on a campus. Yeah. So in this meeting, in one of the meetings, so as you said, many professors, so half of faculty has signed the petition, so there is clearly a very decent amount of support for freedom of expression on campus from professors. And you write that at one of the meetings, most professors clearly were in support of freedom of speech, but some were stridently opposed. And for instance, one of them bragged about having committed violence at Berkeley in order to have a speaker disinvited there.
Mm-hmm.
And these professors are they are a clear minority, as you write, but it seems that they have an influence that sort of outmatches their number, because if people who are in favor of free speech are afraid to say so, then it means that the minority who is in opposition has really more influence than their numbers would indicate.
True. So their voices are very loud. The voices of the people who oppose free speech are very loud, and they make accusations that are extremely serious. They make accusations of racism, who wants to be called a racist. They make accusations of violence, erasure, extermination. So there was one of the students that was at the protest was crying and saying that we wanted to exterminate, to kill her. She would say, "You're literally killing me." I mean, obviously, she doesn't understand the word of literally or killing, but that's what she was accusing the professors of. There was another one that was saying that his job at the college is not to debate professors and is not to hear things that he doesn't that offend him or that are erasing him, and he wasn't here for that. And when I pointed out to him that he was learning so much by having to make an argument to professors, he just left the room when I said that. So these people are very passionate, very loud, and they make accusations that are very serious that nobody wants to be called a racist. No one wants to be called. So I think that really puts people off.
Yeah, that's for sure. So to indicate some more recent developments in this story. So there has been a petition recently, right, that was signed by hundreds of students, and it's been described by I think it's Greg Lukianoff himself, the head of the FIRE Foundation for the Individual Rights in Education, has described it as a petition demanding freedom from speech, not freedom of speech.
Right. So it's interesting. The students wrote that petition. They actually, when they broke into our meeting, they brought that petition with him, and the faculty who was leading the meeting, Steve Gerard, was extremely nice. He welcomed the students into the meeting, and he read their petition aloud to the whole group of faculty that was there. So he was very polite, very nice, but it didn't calm things down. So the students continue to demand. And if you look at what their petition says, it's these accusations that have no basis in reality.
So maybe we can take a small detour from the timeline of the events to discuss some more general points. So to say, so at one point in in your article, you write, and here I will quote you again, that you can learn a lot from arguments with which you disagree. And this is something you have learned listening to creationists, climate denialists, and even some bigots. So this notion that, you should listen to seemingly crazy or extreme viewpoints, and that listening to them will be profitable to you, or useful, or instructive. This notion will be uncomfortable from, I think, say some people. So maybe you can you can convince them by being a bit more specific about, what you learned by listening to people who are promoting such ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when your ideas are never challenged, you kind of forget how to defend them. I think to have your brain well trained to enter a debate or to convince others that your ideas have merit, you have to have your ideas challenged from time to time. So even evolution, for example, obviously as an evolutionary biologist, I know evolution happens. But if I don't know the arguments from creationists, which I deeply disagree with and I see no merit, I do not have the knowledge to automatically put those arguments down with reason. So I think that some of the arguments, if you don't know the arguments ahead so that you can prepare to defend your arguments and basically turn their arguments down, you're going to be in a worse situation. So, with the creationist, it's very clear. I mean, if I go to a debate with a creationist without having heard other creationists, I might be taken by surprise by some arguments. Sure. And not have on the tip of my tongue the answer to that. Right. And that is not to say that we have to invite bigots around. I mean, I would be opposed to, frankly, inviting bigots because I think there is little to be gained. But I don't think that prohibiting them from coming is a good idea. I think that, if somebody else invites them, you have a couple options. You can choose not to waste your time and go to the talk, or you can go to the talk to see if there is something you're missing and to learn how to defend your own views against arguments like ones you despise. So.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. So this is the John Stuart Mill argument about knowing only one's position in an argument. Yeah. So to get back to the events at Williams specifically, I was wondering, because from your account it's not entirely clear. If one reads your account, it's possible that one will come away with the impression that there is more opposition to free speech among students than among professors. Of course, you also mention, as we already discussed briefly, some professors who are hostile to free expression. So is it that there is a minority, both among students and faculty, that is hostile to free expression? And maybe the students are more vocal, or maybe actually they are not. I mean, how would you, sort of describe the proportions?
I would love to know this answer for sure. Yeah. I mean, the problem is that even the people that signed the student petition, a lot of them did not read it. I actually talked to a number of students. They said that they got from a colleague in Facebook the link to this petition, and the only explanation was, if you are against racism, sign this petition. Sure. And of course, everyone is against racism, so they go and they sign it without actually knowing what they're signing. I think there is a lot of that going on.
Okay.
I do think, however, that the proportion of students that are against free speech is larger than that of professors. But again, to get real numbers, I wouldn't be able to say how much more. I think a lot of them have not thought deeply at the issues, and they take face value that that free speech is very harsh on people of color, and that we should do everything we can to protect them, um, and 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 that therefore that they will be in favor of some form of censorship.
If I so you said, if I just repeat what you said, and if I can repeat it correctly, that you think that the proportion of people opposed to free expression is a bit higher among students, right, than professors. So in a way, it doesn't quite fit the notion that students come to campus as freshmen, sort of not having a strong position on this issue, or having a broadly pro-free speech position, and then they get sort of taught otherwise by some professors. It seems that there is already sort of preparedness among a subset of the student population to be opposed to freedom of speech on campus. And so I mean, one can put forward many hypotheses. I mean, there is some evidence, I think, from the Heterodox Academy, among others, that there is some sort of generational, shift on this issue. It could be an effect of secondary education, actually, because secondary education is sort of, people have to decide what is the content of this education. People who make these decisions are often trained in academic disciplines where some some ideas tend to be hostile to free expression, to free inquiry. Sometimes they tend to be sort of influenced by what has been called grievance studies, so yeah, I mean, the one question could be that whether students, maybe it was not the case like 10, 20 years ago, but one can be tempted to think that now students, even before they come to campus, they're already prepared to protest speakers and to try to deplatform them and to try to sort of regulate speech on campus generally. Is this, you think, a fair hypothesis?
Yeah, I think that some of them are definitely already coming in with this worldview. I think it gets reinforced by some disciplines, some professors, and peer students once they get in campus, such that the most loud of the students were seniors and sometimes juniors, but they don't tend to be freshmen. So you see that there is some maturation that goes on for them to appear at the.
Okay. So this is interesting because it sort of lends some credence to the sort of older picture. I mean, this picture of students being slowly indoctrinated, so to say, against free expression on campus. So this is actually interesting. And so maybe we can come to the specific case of biology. This is something that you have experienced first person. I mean, of course, you also actually experienced these debates and protests around freedom of speech in general in the first person, but in your class you have noted some changes. And so you teach biology, of course. So it's only an undergrad level school, right? I mean, it's a liberal arts college, correct?
Yeah, well,
Williams.
college, yeah, it's liberal arts, yeah, only
Okay.
undergrad.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and the main change I've observed, it really happened after Trump got elected, but I don't think that this trend started with Trump. I think it
Yeah.
actually predates Trump. Um, but we started to clearly see in the classroom after Trump, and it's happening in other courses too. I can give you a few anecdotes. Some of them funny.
Sure.
But it's this is this resistance to some concepts that go against what people want to believe or see the world as. So one of the first times I saw that was teaching heritability, and in particular, one of the things I think is very important is to debunk arguments of bell curves, where some races are biologically more intelligent than other races, and in reality, we don't have the data to make some conclusions. So yes, we do have um, averages across different races or populations as different. So, for example, I always use Brazil, being Brazilian. I think that's a good pick. And in Brazil, the IQ of Brazilians, I think it's about 83, and the average IQ for Americans is about 100. So you have like a big gap. So what does that mean? So are Brazilians biologically dumb? And I actually make that question in a clicker question. I tell the students that whoever votes for that fails the course. They are anonymous, so they still vote for it sometimes. Um, so the idea being that obviously the environment influences that dramatically. You're
Hmm.
getting two groups that come from very different environments.
Sure.
So you really cannot tell if the difference you observe is a genetic difference. It's much more likely to be an environmental difference. If you think of the quality of schools, the level of education, all these things affect intelligence, and they are dramatically different between these populations. So I just want to make the point to students that just because you see different averages, that means nothing about biology per
Hmm.
se. Even if intelligence has a heritable component, it's disputable what it is exactly. It ranges, depending on the studies, it will range from 30% to 70%, depending on who is measuring, what population, etc. But it's irrelevant. I mean, if there is a heritable component, there is a very important environmental component, and therefore you can't make anything of this data. Um, but then instead of the students seeing that for what it is, they started to question the reality of IQ tests, and like it really preventing discussion from continuing because they say, but IQ can't be measured. But
Hmm.
IQ doesn't measure anything meaningful. But
Yeah.
IQ, it's like we're not talking about IQ here. We're talking about the importance of genetics and environment in a very complex phenotype, and what is the scientific way of disentangling that, which is not
Hmm.
just getting averages.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's when a student raises an issue like that, and you pointed out, well, you can measure IQ. I don't know if it means anything other than perhaps correlated to academic success. It's not correlated with happiness or anything else. Um, and every student gets into this mode and agrees with the student that posed the questions, like, oh yeah, but we can't even discuss that. So
Hmm.
let's wait here. The most crazy one I had was a resistance to learning of kin selection, which is really, when I teach kin selection, I'm largely focusing on eusocial insects like bees, where they will give their life for the life of the colony. So it's an ultimate altruistic gesture where they're gonna die, and the reason they do that is because of kin selection. There is a high relatedness between individuals, and they're doing that to basically pass their genes through related individuals. And I got a student pretty much crying in my office, saying that concluding that I was saying that it was okay for Trump to hire his family. And I was stunned. And then I got a letter from another student, an email from another student saying a similar line of argument. And it's like the absurdity of this. So now every time I'm teaching that, or anything that has to do with something being selected, I have to say, just because something is naturally selected, that does not mean that it is morally desirable or good. After all, there can be selection for rape, and yet nobody would think that rape is a good thing. So I have to add those things at all times in the course just to prevent this kind of thought.
Have you found that these disclaimers are useful? They work?
They do. I have had the last problems after I start doing that, because I now announce that before I even enter in the topic. That doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean we should only be helping our families. That doesn't mean, and it helps. And other things, like a colleague of mine in teaching physiology this semester had a number of students refuse to use the term male birth control. Instead, they use the term birth control for people born without uteruses, which is incredibly confusing. And you think that the person has a disease or something, and the only reason is because not everybody that produces a sperm identifies with males, and therefore I cannot use the word male because it also has the notation of, I don't know, aggressivity or whatnot, and so they give entire presentation, and the other students think it's fine not to use the term male birth control. So we are seeing a lot of that. Another class, the professor told me that it's hard to say pregnant woman now because the pregnant individual may not identify as a woman, so I have to say pregnant human. So all these things are going on, and people are, So this is new. I never saw that before Trump, actually. But as I said, I think Trump started it. I think that the trend was there. It just exacerbated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As far as I can recall, there was really a sort of eruption of, say, large-scale protests on campus in late 2015, right? There were some high-profile cases in Yale, in Missouri, there was Middlebury, and then a bit later there was Evergreen. So, and the election of Trump was just so Evergreen came later. I should clarify that. The other ones that I've mentioned, they were, say, 6 months before the presidential campaign was really fully in swing, and about 1 year before the election took place. So I suppose, I don't know if there is there is certainly some correlation there. I don't know if there's a simple causal link, but it seemed that, and this is something that was also, observed by the people at the Heterodox Academy, that there was really an intensification of sort of how should I say? Well, sensitivity, right? To put it mildly, to some ideas on campus starting maybe in 2015. And so, have you also compared with colleagues who teach on other campuses? Because maybe, one could formulate the hypothesis, and I don't know how intelligent it would be to formulate it, but one could think maybe it's because it's a liberal arts college, and maybe for people who teach at research universities with students who are really only there to study biology, maybe things are different, or I don't know. What is your impression?
I think that things might be a little more difficult in liberal arts campuses because there is so much cross pollination between different fields of study, right? So someone who is a biologist, let's say, going to Cornell or Harvard might take very few courses outside sciences, whereas here you are required to take several courses outside sciences. And I would say that there is a definite proportion difference between how people see these issues in sciences and outside sciences. I mean, the very idea of giving warnings and if some disturbing material comes, or all these things we don't do in science, they do a lot in the non-sciences. And recently some of my colleagues are getting pushback for that, for not giving trigger warnings because there was a heartbeat, or because
A heartbeat.
so, yeah. So one of my colleagues shows a movie that there is a heartbeat on the background, and one of the students was very disturbed by that and asked for a trigger warning next time. So we don't do that, and we are kind of stunned when someone asks us for trigger warnings, but
Right.
they do that all the time across the street, and and I think that the professors that are really very against free speech are all in the non-sciences department.
And so, what departments would these be? Would they be sort of the classical social sciences and the humanities, or would they be in departments which are sort of the core of the sort of identity or cultural studies, like women's studies, whatever?
Studies. I would say that the concentration is in gender studies, women studies, English a little bit, to a lesser extent, and it's in part because there is affiliations with these other departments as well. But I would say the lead is gender studies, women studies. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And um, I was discussing, I need to remember. Oh, yes, it was. No. Yeah, I don't know if. Well, I was discussing with the previous guest, doesn't matter who, but we were. It was Oliver Trowdy for reference for the podcast, Phonetics. It was. Yeah, we were discussing the fact that as much as one can, be concerned about, opposition to free expression among the ranks of the faculty and the students, something that often gets, say, under-discussed is the role of the administration. So I don't know if you have something to say to that effect. In the case of Williams College, what has been the position of the administration on these issues?
So I think that the administration can have a incredible, powerful, can give direction to the debate. I think that they are the adults in the room. They can send messages to the whole community. They can change the status of things. There hasn't been much leadership from the administration here in terms of setting the free speech stands. The students are asking. The students have done a series of demands this semester. So what happened in the spring was another drama in itself. So 2 professors, one in gender studies, one in English, quit working at the college for the spring. They ended up going in medical leaves and accused the college of violent racism. Somewhat unrelated to the free speech issue, but it got linked to it very quickly. One of the professors has a history of mental issues. He was actually arrested running naked around the museum here. Had several encounters with the police. And the other one was his partner. The one that got arrested is a trans male, so he accuses the college of transphobia and racism, and without knowing the whole background story, the students obviously took their words and made a shrine for them. And in the shrine, they completely blocked the corridor with newspapers and flowers and things so that no one could walk, and that was the intention of the display. But obviously that goes against the fire code, and fire code cannot be, it has to be content neutral, so things have to be removed from the corridor, whether you agree with the manifestation or not. This professor that was responsible for the building, after communicating with security and the fire marshal, removed some of the material that was blocking the corridor so that people could walk. And the students vilified him, and they went after him. They put posters against him all over campus, and there was the response of the administration was very slow, and it didn't fully defend the professor against the accusations. Then now they're going after another professor because she had some kind of discussion with a professor, an Asian professor, that said she was racist against her, and the students are putting these petitions out there against this professor. And again, the response has been weak. The students have been asking for things that I consider quite outrageous. For example, they want segregated housing. The students often want housing just for themselves, and the response of the administration is very mixed. So for alums and professors that are concerned, they say this will never happen here. And for students, they say, well, it's unfair to say that this is segregated house, this is interest house, and we're going to redefine what segregated house means to be based on interest. And we're going to have interest in Africana studies, interest in Latinx to study, and I don't know, some quilting or something to disguise, like cooking, So it's a mixed response, and then the students went after campus security, and that I'm very concerned about. So they put several signs against campus security throughout campus, like distorting stories that happen and making campus security look like a bunch of racists. And those posters were not removed. They were, in fact, allowed to stay for months. And campus security was never given an opportunity to defending themselves. So they were never allowed to clarify what the stories really meant. So the impression of someone just reading the signs that were put was that these were horrible things, whereas if you actually know the story, the student that was grabbed and taken off was a suicidal student on the top of a roof, for example. So that's not exactly racism there, right? It's protocol.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds pretty, say, lively, to put a positive spin on it. And I mean, probably this is very hard for you to say, but I mean, to me, it matches, many of the things I've heard about various campuses. But, there's always, certainly in my mind, I'm always wary to some extent of sort of blowing this out of proportion. I know that these things happen, and I know that they've happened on several campuses, including very prestigious campuses, which is in and of itself very sort of preoccupying. But there's always the possibility that, one is fixating on what is going wrong and sort of not seeing all the places and all the times when and where these things don't happen. So my question would be, I mean, could you, if you were to compare, I mean, it's difficult, but if you were to compare what's been happening at Williams with, say, just any average American university. Do you think this is representative, or it's a crazy outlier, or it's probably hard for you to say.
It is hard. I mean, we are seeing some of that, like pointy situations happening in various places, right?
Yeah,
So I would say it's getting more common. Obviously, you have extreme cases like Evergreen State that were
right.
predates
Yeah.
Williams, and hopefully Williams will never get to that stage. But so it is hard to say. As I said, I do think that the liberal arts kind of environment facilitates
Mm,
this mentality for developing. There are so few students, peer pressure is high, all you need is a few people like being really loud for others to fall. I mean, the
mm,
effect on sports teams is pretty dramatic. These students that said they signed the student petition, they happen to be in sports teams, and they would make all the team members sign the petition. They would come and say, if you are. So there is a component of peer pressure that might be
sure.
bigger in a small location like this, where nobody's anonymous. You
Right.
know what people are doing. There was, for example, a huge campus walk in honor of the two professors that left, and they're coming back in the fall. So the campus walk gathered about 300 students. And I know, because students told me, several students went because they were afraid that if they didn't go, they would be called racists.
Mm,
So there is no anonymity here, and therefore peer pressure is quite intense. So
right.
whether this is to the same extent in other colleges, I don't know. I think where we see most of these uproar are small colleges, right?
Okay.
Sarah Lawrence, Evergreen, here, whereas we see some in larger institutions, but not to the same extent. Middlebury is another one example, right? That's experiencing some.
Mm, fair enough. Um, yeah, I wanted to ask you about the students specifically. So you just reported something quite, quite striking, really, these students feeling, um, I mean, forced, as to go to these events, these protests. Um, so yeah, maybe I can sort of start by introducing some gentle pushback, because you've been calling the student protesters the students, so probably it's a bit unfair, right? You would agree. So it's just a certain number of them. So as you already said, it's hard to quantify which proportion of the student body constitutes really the sort of the activist core. So I'm not going to ask you again, but on the other side, I'm wondering if, just like you've heard from professors who share your positions but are afraid to say so, have you heard from students that well, I mean, this sort of matches, or it's comparable to what you already mentioned, but have you heard from students who say that they would like to sort of oppose these sort of censorious movements, but that they feel unable to do so?
I heard from many students.
Right.
So this past spring, we even had secret lunches, secret dinners to talk about that with
Wow.
groups of students that were opposed but didn't want to be seen. So
Hmm.
we had to go like far out of town so that nobody could be seen. So we could talk about what could be done.
Yeah.
Uh, and there is a definite fear of being accused of racism in particular. I think, as I
Right.
said, who wants to be called a racist, and as free speech gets more and more appropriated by the right,
Yeah.
it becomes difficult for a student to come out as a supporter of free speech
Yeah.
and not be called some extreme right person or racist or whatnot. So
Hmm.
I had a number of students and professors coming to talk to me this semester about about the seriousness of these issues and how afraid they are of voicing any concerns. And these are tenured professors too, which is funny, right? You would think that if you have tenure, you can say anything, but you still, it's not the fear of losing the job, I think. It is the fear of being poorly seen by students and other peers that they are afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it would be the best way of fighting back, but it's easy to say and probably harder to do when you're in the eye of the storm, or when when you might just find yourself in the eye of the storm. So I've reached the end of my questions. Do you think there is something we failed to discuss?
No.
Okay.
Can't think of anything else. We'll see how things develop. I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah, well, so am I. So thanks again, Luana, for coming to talk to me. Have a nice afternoon, and yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Liberté Académique. We are a science, critical thinking, and freedom podcast. We interview researchers, teachers, and authors who have interesting ideas and who defend free, rational, evidence-based thought. We oppose as best we can a sort of anti-intellectualism coming from a section of the intellectual class. We carry out interviews in English and in French. You can find all our episodes on YouTube and on SoundCloud, as well as on the main podcasting platforms such as iTunes, Stitcher, and several others. We are also present on Twitter at @AcadFreedom and also on Facebook.